On Tech News Today, we'll take a look at how Tim Cook has transformed Apple. Plus, it turns out that Android's factory reset option leaves your personal data on the phone. And a phone tester tries to scratch the iPhone 6's new Sapphire screen by stabbing it with a knife. You won't believe what happened. All that and more coming up right now on Tech News Today.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Tuesday, July 8th, 2014. Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. Welcome to the show. I'm Mike Elgan. Jason is off this week. Anthony Nielsen is filling in for Jason. And our co-anchor today and every Tuesday is Joe Panettieri, who is Skyping in from the great state of Florida. Welcome, Joe Panettieri.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you. Technically, I'm on vacation this week with my family, but...
but here you are wearing a blazer and doing some work. Sorry about that, Joe.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Thanks for having me.
Last Friday, or Thursday, I guess it was, Elise Hugh Skyped in as our co-anchor from Jamaica. So it's kind of a trend. People are going south and Skyping in. What are you going to do? Yeah. Well, today's a very, very special day today, Joe, because today is not only chocolate-covered almond day. No, really, it is chocolate-covered, and I've been wolfing these before the show, but it's also Video Games Day. Now, Video Games Day is not to be confused with National Video Games Day, which is September 12th. That's the big one. This is the small Video Games Day, and this one celebrates traditional arcade games of yesteryear. And, of course, you're a huge fan in this category. In fact, you have something of an amazing collection, don't you?
Well, it's a little embarrassing to admit, but yes, I do. And I'm down in Florida, as you know, on vacation this week. And one of the first things I do when I travel is I go onto Craigslist and I check the local listings for any old arcade games and/or video game systems that may be up for sale. So there's quite a few for sale that I may check out while I'm down here.
Wow! And so you have several. You basically have an arcade in your house with the big full size, like the giant knob, like big button.
Yes. And I'm not one of those cheaters who buys the multi-cades with 60 games in one. I prefer the original big boxes like an Asteroids or a Pac-Man Jr. rather than Ms. Pac-Man or Pac-Man. That would be my tip of the day, Mike. For those who are out there looking for a full-size Pac-Man, go with a Pac-Man Jr. It's actually the secret star of the family.
Good to know. Good to know. Everything I know about collecting arcade video games I learned from the Frogger episode of Seinfeld. So in other words, I don't know anything about it, but it sounds great. I can't wait to come over one of these days and try it next time in Long Island to try some of your games.
Yeah,
right.
And we'll put it on free play for you. Don't worry.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll bring a sack full of quarters. Well, the Wall Street Journal tech reporter Daisuke Wakabayashi wrote an in-depth analysis about the impact of Apple CEO Tim Cook on that company 3 years after the late Apple founder Steve Jobs resigned and put Cook in charge. The article was based in part on interviews with more than a dozen current and former Apple employees. Daisuke joins us now to talk about the story. Welcome to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's Happy Video Games Day.
Yes, thank you very much, and same to you. Now, in your piece, you describe a friendlier, gentler Apple under Tim Cook. Can you give us some specifics about some of the things Cook has done that former CEO Steve Jobs might not have done?
Right. I think one of the things is, Steve, for all his great traits and almost genius-like ability in terms of product development, wasn't always the warmest, fuzziest guy. And so Tim is a very decent and good man. And I think, he comes across, whereas, Steve would often dismiss kind of ideas that engineers would bring to him with that's expletive. But Tim will kind of listen to them out, and he's kind of a more thoughtful and a better listener. It's created a kind of more collaborative environment inside Apple. He's also empowered a lot of his deputies to play a bigger role in the organization. In the past, I think Apple was very much Steve and co. And now, Tim's got a very powerful bench of deputies who make kind of key strategic decisions right now.
Is there any danger here of Apple going a little quote unquote soft? You know, I do understand that there are different personalities, very different between Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, but that new, call it friendlier Apple, can the company get a little out of shape, a little flabby in the market because of that?
Certainly, they will make the case that the intensity has not been dialed down at all. But yeah, there are some people, former and current employees, who worry that that kind of really frenetic environment that Steve fostered also led to great innovation. You know, Apple will deny this pretty adamantly. They will say that the intensity is still there, that the product pipeline is looking great. But you know, a lot of people feel like one of the things that Steve did very well was to say no and keep that focus on a few things that the company was very good at. But the problem now with Apple is it's a $171 billion company, and 3 years ago it was a $65 billion company. And so if you think about it, that's $106 billion in 3 years. That's bigger than Google. That's bigger than Amazon. And when you become that big, it's hard to maintain just a focus on a few things. You have to expand, or otherwise you stop growing. And I think that's kind of the rock and a hard place maybe that Apple's in right now.
It seems to me that the combination of Steve Jobs and Tim Cook was a killer combination, because Steve Jobs was what I like to call a visionary dictator. He was not only very decisive, very harsh with employees and so on. It was much more than that. He, as the founder of Apple, had a lot of sway over every employee in the company. I mean, every single employee in the company, probably worshipped him practically, and so he had just enormous influence. And then you had Tim Cook, who was always a brilliant operations expert. Now, is Tim Cook still a genius when it comes to operations, and does he have the bandwidth now to maintain that role?
I think so. I mean, one of the things that pretty much to a person, everyone at Apple will say is that Tim is incredibly not only wide in terms of the things that he knows about, but also deep. And so, he's kind of always been known as a guy who has numbers, at the tip of his fingers, and kind of understands all facets of the company. And certainly operations is something that he has never kind of let go. And he also has a guy, Jeff Williams, who is often referred to as Tim Cook's Tim Cook, who is also, one of the best operations experts out there. And, one of the most amazing things about Apple, in a way, is as it's grown from this, $65 billion company to a $171 billion company, it has not become any less efficient. I quoted in one of my pieces that basically in the previous quarter, Apple had basically a week of inventory for a company with $171 billion in annual revenue. And that compares to something like 8 weeks of inventory at the end of the previous quarter for Samsung. And Samsung is no slouch when it comes to the supply chain management either. So this is a very, very, very well-run company.
Now, what about the changing dynamics? So, I think you mentioned one employee saying that Steve was a wartime CEO and Tim is more of a peacetime CEO. What do you think that exactly meant?
I think, if you think about when Steve came back to Apple, it was, they were weeks from bankruptcy, right? And he was always very worried about having enough cash on hand. And he hated kind of giving away cash for share buybacks or dividends. And he also saw people as potential, he always ran the company as though it could go bust at any moment. I think Tim Cook now realizes that not only is Apple humongously successful, but it also has responsibilities as a result of that. And that's why he's pushing them to be kind of a leader in terms of green energy. Their data centers are run on all renewable energies. He's pushed the company to do donation matching. And all these things, and he's been, advocate for gay rights as well. And all these things are things that are hugely popular with the employees, are things that a lot of employees wanted for a long time, but Steve resisted. And I think those are just kind of emblematic of a kind of Apple that it takes its responsibilities a little bit more seriously than a company that's kind of on the nice edge would.
Now, I just learned from Elise Hu, who tweeted the fact that today, I believe, is the Wall Street Journal's 125th anniversary. So in addition to Chocolate Covered Almond Day and Video Games Day, it's the anniversary of the Wall Street Journal. So congratulations on that. Now, a quick one more question about Tim Cook. Now, you mentioned the gay pride video. This is really an example to me that the whole Tim Cook phenomenon is a pretty recent one. He's been the CEO for 3 years, but he seems to really, in the last few months, be really turning the ship around, doing things that are very uncharacteristic of Apple. Now, this video, which began circulating yesterday, is one example. You know, the big gay pride parade in San Francisco took place, I guess, last weekend or recently. And the video, what's interesting about the video is that the people in the video are Apple employees. It's a very personal look at the actual employees of Apple marching the parade, preparing for it, and all that kind of stuff. And you never really saw that kind of thing before. Apple was never the kind of company that was like, oh, get to know us as employees. And so that's a big difference. Another big difference, and I'm getting to my question, is the purchase of Beats Electronics. That seemed like a very uncharacteristic move. Do you think there are any, can you imagine any circumstance where Steve Jobs would have purchased Beats Electronics?
It's hard to imagine that being the case. I've talked to a lot of former employees, and they always kind of emphasize that Steve loved building it internally, and he had a deep faith that the company could build it better internally than buy something external. And I think Apple has been open about the fact that what they were really interested in was not necessarily the headphones as much as the music service. And, you know, it's not like Beats had a huge user base that they could acquire. It's basically the know-how and how to do a subscription-based music service. And to me, it seems like it would be hard to imagine a scenario where, you know, Steve Jobs would pay for that. That said, you know, one of the things that Steve looked at purchasing in the past was a music label. And, you know, he's always loved music. Apple's always been kind of closely identified with the music industry. And the talent there, and I think the creative talent is something that Steve had a lot of respect for. And so while it's hard to imagine a scenario where they would have made an acquisition like that, you know, if they were going to go kind of outside the norm, it could be for something that involved kind of creative talent like Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre certainly bring to Apple.
Yeah, and of course, Steve Jobs was a personal friend of Jimmy Iovine, in part because Iovine was a strong supporter, a rare supporter in the music industry of Steve Jobs and Apple's disruptive 99-cent per song, buy them one at a time kind of model for iTunes in the early days in 2001, 2002. So that is an interesting dimension to this whole question. Daisuke Wakabayashi, I want to thank you for coming on Tech News today. Of course, you write for the Wall Street Journal, and that is WSJ.com. And you are on Twitter at DaiWaka. That's DaiWaka. Thanks for coming on Tech News today.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Now, Joe, Android has a method for wiping your personal data to protect your data from getting in the wrong hands if you sell your phone or whatever. But it turns out that may not be as good as it sounds at first.
Yeah, you know, the best laid plans. So Mike, let's imagine one of our viewers or listeners wanted to resell or donate his or her Android phone to another user. Now, conventional wisdom says, hey, you know what? Just use the Android factory reset option, and that's going to delete your personal data before you hand that device over to the new owner or resell it to a new owner. Now, here's the interesting curveball in all this. There's a security company out there called Avast that suggests the reset option doesn't really work as advertised. Now, here to bring us some insights in terms of what's really going on here is Seth Rosenblatt from CNET. Seth, good to have you on the show. How you been?
Good. Morning over here.
Thank you very much for joining us. Really, really appreciate your time. Can you give us some insights here? Does this feature work or doesn't it? And what's the information based on?
Sure. So the information, the feature works in the sense that it will do a first level wipe of the data, but it appears that with standard, easily downloadable forensics tools, digital forensics tools, a lot of that data can be resurrected. And Avast, which has been in the consumer security business for, over 2 decades now, has went out, bought 20 phones off of eBay, and discovered that they could recover a lot of the data. Not all of it, but they could recover a lot of it. They resurrected 40,000 photos, including, somewhat amusingly, they noted 250 half-nude male selfies. I don't really know what to make of that, but the point being is that is that the default wiping tool on Android, but also probably on iOS and on Windows Phone and on your Windows computer and on your Mac, probably isn't enough if you are concerned about somebody getting a hold of the device or if you resell it and then resurrecting data. It's really important, I think, before you sell something or give it away, to download a third-party app that can do this and wipe your data completely.
Now, Avast, of course, knows how to sell software, and so they've got this report out there with nude selfies as a keyword that people can find on search, and all this other information. And, of course, conveniently, they have a tool that they say works much better than the default tool. Does that mean we can't really trust this report? How trustworthy is this report? It's clearly a marketing stunt to a certain extent, but is this trustworthy information?
I think, you know, it's important in the sense that people should be more aware of this as a problem. I don't think that it's necessarily as important that you go and get Avast's particular tool for wiping phones, although if you do have it, you know, it's probably good to use. But yeah, you know, it's a small sample set. They tested 20 phones that they went on to eBay and bought. eBay, Avast even noted, has up to around 80,000 phones for sale at any given day, used phones. So this is certainly a marketing stunt, but it's one that's based in fact, I believe.
Now, in terms of the actual data that Avast was able to see and or recover from these phones, are we just talking about photos here, or are there other personal information?
No, and that's one of the other things about this report. They were able to recover the identities of the phone owners in 4 cases. They were able, in 1 case, to recover a completed loan application, which, of course, you know, will have important information like your social security number, your home address, phone number, place of employment, things like that. So there's definitely, you know, people, and Avast rightly makes the point that there is serious information that people carry around on their phones. It's the computer in your pocket, and it does even more than just a laptop or desktop. So anything, from my point of view, anything that raises people's awareness of how much personal data they keep on their phones and, you know, the seriousness of simply selling it or giving it away, you know, is a good thing.
And, of course, this is great news for people who want their nude selfies to get in the wrong hands. But, you know, there's no accounting for taste. Seth Rosenblatt writes at cnet.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at SethR. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining us on Tech News today.
Thanks for having me on.
Marques Brownlee, who reviews mobile products on YouTube under the name MKBHD, got his hands on what he claims is an iPhone 6 screen made with sapphire. Marques stabbed and scratched it with a knife and keys. He bent it and generally abused the screen, and he was unable to make even the slightest scratch or mark on it at all. Anthony, let's take a look at this amazing video.
I broke out a knife, and I broke out the keys, and I did some scratching, or at least I thought I was doing some scratching. Basically, I took the knife to the sapphire pretty hard. I applied some deep pressure, really pushed it down, and I got nothing. So then I moved on, and I did it with my keys. Again, this is way beyond what you would normally do with the phone, but I pressed down really hard. This is way past any pressure that's going to be in your pocket. I scraped them, dragged them across the panel, applied a lot of pressure, still nothing. And then I went on to
no, he really shanks
stab the thing pretty hard right in the middle and drag the point of the knife around the surface with some serious pressure. Again, well beyond stuff you're ever going to do with your phone. And I got no results. So clearly you don't need a screen protector here. And lastly, I tried to bend it. First, like seriously bend it. So at first I was kind of tentative because I thought maybe there was a chance I might break it, maybe shatter it. But I slowly realized there is absolutely no way I can break this display under my own power.
Now, Anthony, if you keep this rolling but turn the sound down, we'll keep talking over the video. Now, this is really an interesting, well, this was a tragic video for me to see because I saw this video approximately 30 minutes after I smashed my Moto X screen yesterday.
Were you testing it similar to this, Mike?
Yeah, I was testing it. I have the fancy wood-backed Moto X, and it turned out, as I learned after I received it, after I ordered it, that it's very slippery. It's like a bar of soap, this thing, and I've always worried about dropping it. I dropped it on a wood floor yesterday and just shattered in a gazillion pieces, really. And the reason for that is because, as I've learned in researching this whole Sapphire issue, breaks, cracked screens are primarily the result of previously existing scratches. So you scratch a screen and then a little bit of pressure will shatter the screen. If there are no scratches, oftentimes the screen won't break if you give it some impact. And this is one of the benefits, supposedly, of the Sapphire technology, because it won't scratch. And if it won't scratch, it won't shatter. That's the thinking behind this thing. Now, I did a lot of research on this some time ago, writing about this when Apple was caught hoarding Sapphire and building expensive factories and doing all kinds of things around Sapphire. And a lot of the technology and the patents and the companies that they acquired around this suggested that they were going to work on a Sapphire laminate. Now, it has to be said, just to emphasize the point, that this video, Marques Brownlee is a very credible person. It's very likely that that is a legitimate iPhone 6 screen, but we don't know that for sure. We don't know even that it's Sapphire. That's the 4.7-inch screen. The rumors previously had been that that size was going to be Gorilla Glass and the larger screen was going to be Sapphire, but he claims this is Sapphire. I don't know how he knows for sure that's Sapphire, but back to my point, the technology that they seem to be pursuing was something called a Sapphire laminate. And a Sapphire laminate is basically where they put a very thin layer of sapphire on top of regular glass, which enables it to be thinner and lighter. And it looks, if you look at the thinness of that and then the difficulty he had breaking it, even when he's stepping on it and pulling it back, this is something new. This is some amazing technology there. And I don't know. What do you think about this, Joe? Is this the kind of thing that's really going to sell phones, or will nobody really care?
You know what? I think as soon as the layperson begins to understand that it's similar to a car windshield in that, think about it, when does your windshield crack? It's because the full crack comes from a small chip or a small imperfection in your windshield that's already there, and then suddenly you hit that massive pothole and everything cracks. So I think the logic is very similar here in that approach. And ironically enough, if you walk by an AT&T store these days or a Verizon store, what are they advertising more and more? They're not necessarily advertising the phones anymore or the tablets. They're advertising, we repair these devices and the cracked screens and everything else. So I do think as people get their hands on these new technologies that the demand will go up. But on day one, not so much. Longer term, as people begin to understand that you just can't break this, well, yeah, then the word of mouth is going to get going on it. Yeah,
and especially, even the more subtle marketing angle of this is that everybody's iPhone is likely to look fantastic all the time, and they won't look like this. By the way, this is my Moto X. It still works. It still works fine. It's just broken, tragically. I have a theory about very quickly, and then we'll move on to the next story. But I have a theory about exactly why Apple is pursuing Sapphire so aggressively. They're obviously a design-oriented company. They obviously put huge amounts of effort into building these, beautiful designs, elegant designs. Unfortunately, nobody, most people don't actually reveal that design because, especially with the iPhone 5 line, which is easily scratched, it has that metal thing on the back, and iPhone 5s can look really horrible very quickly. If you put one of those in your pocket with keys, you're going to have a lousy-looking phone. So your choices are to either cover it up with a case, in which case you can't see Apple's design, or to scratch it up with your keys, in which case Apple's design doesn't look that good. And so I believe that Apple is doing this so that people, essentially to kill the market for cases and get everybody carrying their iPhones around without a case, so that Johnny Ive's designs can be seen in all their glory without being marred and chipped and all that kind of thing. That's my theory. I had originally guesstimated that they were going to put it on both sides.
I love conspiracies, Mike. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it does make a lot of sense if they can pull it off. The question is this all that is cracked up to be? I mean, many of the claims made for Sapphire were the same claims made for Gorilla Glass. Gorilla Glass is pretty good, but it's not perfect. So this may not be perfect either. It may not be good enough to carry an iPhone around without a case. So we'll see how that goes.
My question for you, do you recall with the previous iPhone releases, this number of leaks leading up to the actual release showing off the technology like this. So maybe your conspiracy theory is accurate. They're really showing off the design more and more before they've even confirmed that such a device is under development.
Yeah, I think that it's been ramping up steadily. 2 or 3 years ago, the leaks were far fewer. There were rumors, and many of them were false. Nowadays, the rumors are kind of, they seem like they're probably false. And as we get closer to the launch, which is looking like it may be September, they're clearly not false. I mean, if this isn't the iPhone screen, somebody made a piece of glass that can't be chipped. I mean, it's like, pretty amazing technology for a fake, if that's what it is, which again, I don't believe it is. So I think that the bigger Apple gets, the more partners it has involved, the more awareness comes to the lucrative, in China, it's very lucrative to get your hands on this stuff because it can be sold to somebody who will sell it to somebody who will sell it to a reporter or something like that. So I think that there's a rising awareness about the benefits of leaking information, leaking parts. And of course, there's no way to build a phone. You notice that, and we talked about this at the most recent developers conference, Apple surprised everybody by launching a development tool, a programming language, right? And we thought, wow, they really are capable of keeping a secret. The difference is you can build software with nobody, with no partners, right?
You're not ramping up your supply chain with software.
That's right. Yep. I mean, to build a phone, to build a new phone that has new parts, and in this case, Sapphire technology, you're building factories, you're buying machinery, you're testing components, and all of that involves multiple people all over the world, especially in Asia, and you never know who's going to sort of steal something or take pictures or whatever. And so it's just basically impossible to keep a secret this big anymore. And I don't think they'll ever be able to do it unless, of course, there is a lot of talk now about Foxconn embracing robots, having a lot fewer employees in their factories. And we could get to the point where iPhones are manufactured all in one place eventually by robots, where there are fewer people involved, and there may be some degree of secrecy there. But anytime soon, I don't see it happening. There's just no way to keep this kind of secret. Yeah. Well, there's been an interesting development in the relationship between China and American technology companies because of the NSA Snowden revelations. The Chinese government has been using these revelations as an excuse, really, to sort of crack down on American companies like Google and Apple and others. But it looks like one American company may be doing something about it. Can you tell us about that, Joe?
Yeah, Mike, I think you're onto something here, and I'm glad we're discussing this today. So you look at the situation, and it's particularly timely this week. The U.S. and China, we've got leaders from both countries, getting together, and they're sitting down, ironically enough, to talk about cyber espionage. And it's quite ironic when basically on a day-by-day basis, you've got one country accusing the other of spying on them, and vice versa. Plus, the U.S. is worried about networking companies and networking equipment out of China containing backdoors. And then you've got China having similar concerns about IT equipment coming from the U.S. and going into China. But Mike, as you pointed out, maybe there is a U.S. company that can bring some thawing out of this technology Cold War. And that company could be IBM. And here's the theory. The theory goes something like this. Number one, China just approved IBM's sale of its x86 server business over to Lenovo. We're still waiting on U.S. approval there. But on the flip side, you've also got IBM investing $100 million into the China education system to educate Chinese students about big data and other applications. And it's almost like IBM's olive branch to China to say, hey, you know what? You can trust us. Help us educate you. But in return for that $100 million investment, and this is me speculating, not IBM's words, my words, I think IBM's strategy here is we'll invest $100 million in China if China please open your doors to our technology, both hardware and software, going forward. So this could be a big week, Mike, particularly with the conversations going on among key leaders from the U.S. and China on this very issue of cyber espionage.
Yeah, and it is interesting because, China does need the kind of help that IBM can provide. They have a lot of experience with large systems, with now artificial intelligence, with Watson and so on. And China has some supercomputers, but they don't have IBM's experience at applications for those systems. And so it sounds like a really good deal. I've also seen in the news that IBM is working with China to apply big data to the problem of pollution and smog to try to clean up the air in China. We'll see how that goes. But it's really interesting to see this. I mean, IBM has been involved in China. You know, most American companies have been in China a decade or decade and a half, something like that. IBM has been involved in China for many decades. They were very early to go into China, and even when they were under, you know, Mao and stuff, that IBM was in there trying to drum up some business. So they've really earned it. And you know, a part of this is deals which you see throughout the world of companies, technology companies, partnering with universities. IBM is partnering with the Beijing Institute of Technology, Fudan University, and a bunch of others to sort of work with them on a research level as well. And those kinds of ties go a long way, because those researchers then go oftentimes into companies, into government, and so on, and they have personal ties. So this is one way to do it. This is one way to crack China. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's very difficult also to navigate the ethical issues of working with an authoritarian regime, and you don't want to be helping them suppress democracy. You don't want to be helping them, you know, execute, protesters and that sort of thing. But you do want to help them open up and establish relations so that you can, you know, get in on the biggest market in the world.
Absolutely. Get in on the biggest market. And, you know, it's been interesting because if you listen to earnings calls in the U.S., whether it's IBM or Cisco or others, they're hinting more and more that occasionally their earnings per share each quarter are impacted negatively because they can't quite crack the China market because of all these spying concerns, and it's been heightened by the whole NSA situation, without a doubt. Now, the other thing with China, Mike, and the IBM relationship there is it sometimes takes two to dance, and the dance is IBM and Lenovo, and they've done this dance before, of course, when IBM sold its PC business to Lenovo, and on the downside, some I shouldn't say downside. On the challenging side, some U.S. government agencies have basically banned Lenovo desktops, and you wonder if those same U.S. government agencies will ban Lenovo servers if and when they take over that IBM business within the next few months. So you've got the technology side going on, then you got the political side this week with high-level discussions between the countries. Should be great to watch for some more fireworks in the days ahead.
Absolutely, and of course, you know, everything changes because of the Edward Snowden revelations and with all the spying done by the NSA. Now the U.S. government's whole position on banning this or banning that coming out of China is, we suspect you may have done what we did on these systems. So, you know, that's a weaker position than we suspect that you're, you know, putting spyware in the systems because we've already proved that the U.S. has. So, and whether China has is an open question. But anyway, it's an interesting story, and we'll keep an eye on that to see if they make any serious strides in China. Well, the Guardian newspaper reported this morning that Facebook isn't the only organization trying to figure out how to influence social media users. The Pentagon has been studying how influencers on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, and even Kickstarter achieve their influence. The research wing of the U.S. military, which of course is called DARPA, reportedly studied the Twitter feeds of Lady Gaga and Justin Bieber to figure out how they do it, how they get so many followers and retweets. And like Facebook, DARPA interacted with users to find out how they'd respond, and those users were unaware that they were part of a study. Pretty interesting. Well, Joe Panettieri, that is the tech news today. I want to thank you for Skyping in from Florida and interrupting your vacation. I feel like I'm interrupting everybody's vacation these days, but I appreciate your dedication to this. And yeah, happy Video Games Day, man.
Thank you very much. I enjoy my Tuesdays jumping on the show, and I look forward to joining next Tuesday.
All right, Joe. See you next Tuesday, and have a good time in Florida.
All right, take care.
All right. Well, you can subscribe to Tech News Today on iTunes, YouTube, Feedly, Yahoo, RSS, and many other options, and we encourage you to do that. You can choose your favorite way to subscribe at twit.tv/TNT. All the options are there. And please follow us on Twitter. Tech News Today TV is our Twitter handle. And please follow Twit's breaking news feed on Twitter, Twit News. You can also join our Google Plus community and also circle our page. Just search Google Plus for Tech News Today and subscribe to our subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com. twit.com. And we want to hear from you, so comment on Twitter or Google Plus using the hashtag TechNewsToday, and send us email at tnt@twit.tv. Also, don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight, and every weeknight right here on the Twit Network. My name is Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.